Well, welcome to the Fremont Podcast, and thank you for tuning in. This is our God and Government series. Seth and I are humbled and honored to introduce our guest today. We've been following her for some time, and she's become one of our heroes. Her story, her journey is so impactful, and I'm excited for her to share with you guys today. Dr. Carol Swain is the host of the podcast Be the People, and author and editor of 9 books, one of which, Black Faces, Black Interests, has won 3 national awards. Another of her books, The New White Nationalism in America, was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. She is also the host of 2 Minutes to Think About It, heard on Bot Radio and other Christian radio stations. She's the former university professor of political science and law at Princeton and Vanderbilt universities. She's appeared on Fox News, ABC, CNN, BBC, NPR, and among other international outlets. Dr. Swain was a national mayoral candidate in 2018 and 2019. Her opinion pieces have been published in the likes of the New York Times, USA Today, CNN Online, and on and on. Dr. Carol, thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, today this is truly awesome.
We're
thank you.
Blown away.
You know, these days we say the Black conservatives are like the rock and roll artists back in the day, standing up for many people, taking the heat and you know, just front line. So what I really want to cover to start off with today is just, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background? You have a really interesting story that we're just learned about this week, in fact. So I don't know, maybe start with just, you grew up, I think, 11 brothers and sisters in Virginia. Can you tell us just a little bit about what that was?
Well, I was born and raised in southwestern Virginia in a little community named Chamblissburg. And it was the kind of place that if you were driving along the highway and you blinked, you could pass through it, because it probably was not more than a mile or 2. It did not have a city center. We lived off the highway in the country, deep country. And for about the early part of my life, about 9 people lived in a 2-room shack without any indoor plumbing, and we had to carry our water from a spring. The level of poverty I experienced was such that if it snowed deep in the winter, we stayed home. The children stayed home until the snow melted, because we did not have snow shoes, and we did not have proper clothing. And back in those days, you had to walk to the bus stop, which was along the highway, and stand and wait for the bus. And as you can imagine, the bus was always late. And I remember one year that I missed, along with my siblings, 80 of 180 school days, and all of us failed that year.
Wow.
So I dropped out of school after completing the 8th grade. I married at 16, had my first child at 17, and by the time I was 21, I had 3 small children. People came into my life, and my life changed. I got a high school equivalency. I went to a community college and got the first of 5 degrees, and never had a plan of becoming a professor, but people came into my life, they steered me, and I became, a university professor that didn't just squeak by. I was noted. I got a signing bonus. I was a hot shot in my day.
Awesome.
Wow, that's amazing. And, when you mentioned that, I'm thinking about my wife, too. She grew up in South Side of Chicago, and there's a couple people in her life that came in at just the right time and encouraged her and got her to Fisk University in Nashville. But what, if you don't mind me asking, what did those people that came into your life say or do that encouraged you to go back and finish and kind of, in essence, like shoot for the stars?
Well, there are a lot of things that were going on. As a child, I always knew that I was different. And I would even say today that I fall into the category of misfits. But I know the kingdom of God is full of misfits, so I'm in good company. And so I did not fit in easily with my siblings. And I felt like I spent my childhood as a participant observer, that I would be watching my family. And I thought that was so strange And my mother said I'd hide in a corner, or I would hide behind furniture, and I would peer out. She didn't like my ugly ways, and my ugly ways was I hid behind furniture. And I would peep out at people. But that, like I felt very alien in my own family. But I also felt a sense of urgency. I always felt that there was something I was supposed to do, and I had this unresolved tension. But because of circumstances, I married early, and I started raising my kids. I got involved with Jehovah's Witnesses, and I became increasingly depressed. In late teens, early 20s, I would just take bottles of pills and usually call someone and get rescued. But I probably should have died from those pills, because I can remember taking like bottles of aspirins and vomiting up, which I'm sure was blood. It was black. But during one of those times, my medical doctor told me that I was intelligent, I was attractive, I could do more with my life, and I was shocked. But he was this young white intern and later resident, but I had forgotten that when I was in school that I was really smart. And no one had ever told me that I was attractive, and so that was kind of shocking. And that conversation with him was the catalyst for me to get my high school equivalency. And I saw what would have been my high school class graduating, and people that I knew were not as smart as I was. They were getting their degrees, and I was so embarrassed. Each time I had a child, I had to list the highest education completed. So one time I put down, ninth, which was a lie, because I only completed the eighth at that point. And then I think for the next child, I put down 10th. But I was just so embarrassed that I had not finished high school. But the conversation with the doctor led me to finish high school. And around that same time, and this was 1975, I took a job outside the home, and I worked a number of jobs. I worked in a garment factory. I sold things from door to door. I sold smoke detectors, and back then they cost like $700. Or at least the company that I was selling for sold them for that, and I was able to sell the first one of the sales group, and I was the only black and the only woman, and so I felt really proud of myself when I sold the first $700 smoke detector.
That's not bad.
And we sold it by showing people a video of what could happen to your family if you didn't have the smoke detector. And so there's all these burnt bodies and things, and you really scared people, including myself. You knew you had to have a smoke detector. But so I was in the job market. Most of my time in the job market was in nursing homes, working as a nurse's aide. And while I was in one of those nursing homes, I met an African orderly from Sierra Leone. And he told me, hey, I go to college with a lot of people who are not as smart as you are. You ought to go to college. And so he planted that seed. I checked, and I learned that I could go to college with a GED. And so that's how I got started. And so the doctor changed my life by reminding me that there was a time when I was smart and that I could do more with my life. And then with the African orderly, he told me I ought to go to college, and that set me on a path. But my whole life has been people coming into my life and steering me. I was not a devout Christian believer then. I've always been spiritual, but I would not say that I was a devout believer. But I've always known that there was a spirit world. I've always felt special. I've always felt set aside. And so when I started studying psychology in college, I was very worried, because I thought, I must have that condition where you have delusions of grandeur.
I like that. Delusions of
I like
grandeur.
that.
That's fun. I love it. Awesome. So you said you grew up always feeling a little bit alienated in your family. Did you ever feel alienated because you were African American?
Oh, no. I'm just saying that people like me, they can be white, black, Asian, but there's some of us that are just different.
Sure.
And I've always been different. And
I love it.
And part of the difference for me, I think, is that I can see things. And I think as a spiritual sense, I think that I may have a prophetic gifting, but I also think that for some reason I can sort of see trends, or I see things coming, and it enabled me with my research to have sort of an edge on other people, because I can take a lot of information and put it together, and I see a picture in the way that they don't. So it's just a way, it is a way I was wired. And when it comes to my race, I would argue that my race has advantaged me more than it could have disadvantaged me, because, all right, I grew up in the segregated South. I was born in 1954. That was the year of the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court case that desegregated schools across America, but they said in all deliberate speed. So that meant that it was 1968 or 1969 before Virginia integrated. So I spent my early part of my life in segregated schools, where I received an excellent education from those teachers. And I had heard from them that when we integrated, when we went to the white school, that we would be behind. And I knew I was smart at the black school, but I didn't know that I would be as smart at the white school. So my self-confidence, even though I dropped out of school, it was built by the fact that, I was smart. And I realized that white people were not smarter than I was. That when I was competing, I was always competing with them. And as far as my race, I watched on television the civil rights movement, because out in the country, you have to watch it on TV. Nothing is happening in the country. But I saw opportunities open up for people like me, and I was able to get an equal opportunity, to apply to colleges and universities and to be admitted. But I always wanted to prove that myself. And I didn't want anyone to say that my accomplishments were because of affirmative action. Now, I realize people say that and could say it anyway, that they can say whatever they want. But I was an honest student because I wanted to be an honest student, that I put in the time to make A's and graduated magna cum laude from my four-year college, Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia, which is predominantly white. I graduated with the honors while working 40 hours a week, nights and weekends, at the community college library, where when I had to, I could bring my children.
Wow.
Yeah, I was struck by just, like you said, the doctor just gave a kind word like that at the right time, and how, we're sitting here talking to you now, and just all that's connected to that, just a reminder how important it is to speak life to people, that, and just plant those seeds, man. That's wow. I had never heard that story before. So you get to college and you go, I forget where you did your master's and PhD.
Well, I can tell you about my degrees, and I can also tell you about 3 years ago, I got up enough courage to track down that doctor and reintroduce myself.
Oh, how
wow.
And he was 25 when I was 20, and he remembered our conversations. And he said he always wondered what happened to me, but he was not on the internet. He's like 68, or, well, maybe he's older than that now, because I'm 66 and he's 5 years older. But he said he always wondered what happened to me, and he was not on the internet, and he was not watching TV. He never saw me, and I don't know if he would have recognized me, but I've been to his home and met his wife and reacquainted myself with him, and he's become a part of my life. And his wife told me just how excited he was the day I called. And then I've shared this with other doctors, and I had one female doctor tear up because she said, "I wonder if I ever changed anyone's life."
Wow, amazing. And
That's
so
so powerful.
you actually came to know the Lord, you said, during college, right? And
No, late in life.
later
Later in
than
As
life.
a
that.
Okay.
professor.
Oh, you were
Again,
a
I was always
professor.
spiritual, and my degrees, I have a 2-year degree from Virginia Western Community College in business. I wanted to do art. I had won awards as a student, as a child, and I have art talent. I was told to be practical, and I've always been a person that I looked to people that I thought were wiser. I've always looked to older people. I've always mentored well. So when they tell me to be practical, I did business. And my first degree is in business merchandising. My second degree is in criminal justice from Roanoke College. And with I thought that I was going to be a store manager. Uh, with the degree from the community college, I applied for jobs. I was told that I needed a 4-year degree. I don't really believe that I needed a 4-year degree to manage a store at the mall, but that's what they told me. It kept me in school. And to choose my major for the 4-year college, I knew from filling out job applications that I needed something to put on those applications, that there were places for awards and honors and accolades, and I had nothing other than I had made the dean's list a couple of times. And so I made a conscious decision that I was going to be an honor student. I was working in a library, so I checked out and I purchased books on how to make A's in college, how to take essay exams, how to take objective tests. I applied those principles and was able to graduate magna cum laude. And while I was at Roanoke College as a senior, I initiated a scholarship for minority students that is endowed at Roanoke College. It's called the Constance J. Hamler Scholarship, named after one of my professors at the community college. And so that was, but criminal justice I chose because I knew I was good at anything that didn't have a lot of math. And so it was a very strategic choice. And I can tell you that I always struggled with math, and I took my math and sciences as a senior. And I ended up earning an A in one math class. And how I did that was when I got that first exam back and I made a D, I didn't make an F or something like that. And I can remember I was probably in my mid 20s crying with that paper in my hand. I dropped the class. The professor let me stay in the class and attend it. And I took all the exams. And so I actually stayed in that class, took the exams, and then I took it the next semester for credit. And I had worked through so many problems that when I took the final exam, I felt like I was having an out of body experience because it was like I was on automatic pilot. So that was the only A I made in math in college, and probably the only one I would ever make.
Amazing.
And from there, I went to Virginia Tech thinking that I would become I'd work for the government. And I had decided I didn't want to become a lawyer or anything like that. I would work for the government. And while I was at Virginia Tech, my professors discovered me, and there was also the recession of the 1980s. Even though I was an honor student, I was well known in my city, I could not get the jobs that I applied for. So I applied to graduate school, got into a PhD program, started giving conference papers around the country so that when I was graduating, I was known across the country. And I did not have my Christian conversion experience until I was in my 40s, but I've always been spiritual. And even back when I was at Virginia Western Community College and I was a young adult, I had strangers come up to me at least 3 times to say, you know, you're going to be famous someday. And, you know, there was nothing I was doing at the time that any of that made sense.
Wow.
Okay.
It's so inspirational. And I think you said this on another interview I saw as well, but part of your thing was you would find people that were really good at what you were wanting to do, and you would basically do whatever they told you to.
Yeah.
And
That's
everything.
a good mentee.
Yeah, we were talking about that, just how important that is to find good people and kind of nestle under them and learn from them. Well, so you become a born again Christian. I think, were you at Vanderbilt as the professor at that time?
No, I was in the process of leaving Princeton.
Oh, in the process of leaving.
I had accepted, my spiritual journey started. I mean, I've been on a journey all of my life, and my personality is I was always a seeker. And and I knew that there was a spiritual world, and I was drawn towards things like Edgar Cayce, you know, out of body experience. And now I would, as a Christian, I would jokingly say that I was drawn to the dark side.
I hear you. I hear you.
But I read literature like that, and so I was very spiritual. But after I had earned my tenure at Princeton, it's just like I was so disillusioned. I had worked so hard, and I just nonstop to get my education. I had won all those prizes, and I was so empty inside. Just so empty. And but that journey continued with me studying Eastern religions, the New Agey kind of stuff. At that time in the 90s, there was the angel explosion. You all may be too young to remember this, but it was, find your angel, sit down, have coffee with your angel, chat with your angel, all of this stuff about angels. And I believed clearly that there was the spiritual world. But there was just a series of events. And late, I think it was 1997 when I had an experience, and that was a year before I accepted the job at Vanderbilt, but it put me on the Christian path, was that I was in a medical hospital. I was in a hospital for a medical condition, and it was like my life played in front of me, and I thought I was dying. And it was like I had a narrator showing me different points in my life, asking me to choose, and I chose Christ, but I was sure that I was dying as an unsaved person. And that hospital, which was in Princeton, had a Black Pentecostal apostolic chaplain, which is really, really strange. That's not a community where you get Black Pentecostal apostolic.
Sure.
And there was a Black cleaning lady who threw a book in my bed, and she said, "All you need is Jesus." And I still had the book that she threw in my bed. And that year, I was hospitalized like 3 or 4 times. That chaplain arranged for me to get baptized at a little inner city church in Trenton after that first hospitalization. And I didn't know what I was doing really. I mean, I knew I was getting baptized, but I can't say that I knew Christ. I said the sinner's prayer and stuff like that. And all I remember was an inner city church. I got baptized in February in a metal tub of ice water, as I recall. And went to that church for about 3 months, made the decision to attend one of their evening services, and I just was, I walked in there, and it's very clear that in the morning, the Pentecostals have a different service for people that may not understand their ways. When I came in the evening, they were dancing and shouting and loud and all of the things that they do when they let their hair down. And it just terrified me. And then the pastor was walking through the aisles, and he whispered in my ear, "God's going to use you in amazing ways." And at that point, I got out of there. And I went back years later just to visit them, but that was too much for me. But I left in 1997. I would say that I had this, I was at that point spiritually, but I was not a Christian practicing. I was blending New Age, Christianity, Eastern concepts. I had my own religion, the Swain religion. And it was a blend of all of that. And when Vanderbilt hired me, I was very concerned about being in the Bible Belt. They hired me in 1998. I came in 1999. I came in 2000. But between the time they hired me and when I actually showed up, I had become a devout Christian believer. And I made the decision to get rebaptized because while I was in New Haven, I went back to school. I got a 5th degree from Yale. And so I have a degree from the Roanoke College, Virginia Tech, University of North Carolina, PhD. And then I went back and got a master's in law from Yale. And it was at Yale in New Haven where I became a devout believer. I understood the Christian message and the gospel, and I knew my life was not about me, that my life was bigger than me. It was meant to be shared. And God removed my fear of public speaking. And so I came to Nashville in 2000 as a new believer. And the longer I stayed in Nashville as a new believer in the church, I became more and more conservative. And so that's the Carol Swain story.
So powerful.
The real question is, when are they making the movie?
Yes.
You can imagine. You can't imagine. Well, I can tell you that I've skipped over lots of parts, supernatural experiences and things that most people would be afraid to share. But I believe that God has given me a story for a reason, and He removed a lifelong fear of of speaking, just talking, of the fear. Wow. Because there have been times as a child, I would literally forget how to speak. And then as a professor, I had to write out everything I was going to say. And if I was going to introduce someone, I had to have that paper in my hand, and that paper would be shaking. I'd be clutching the lectern. And instantly the Lord removed that. And I was able to, go on national TV and have the life that I have today. I would never have been able to have that life if I was fear-bound the way I used to be.
Powerful. So you said as you continued to attend church in Nashville, you became more conservative. Can you tell us about that process and how that came to be?
Were you conservative politically before that, or was that just an increase?
I think all of my life I've had good common sense. And so even as a Democrat and as a professor, one of the reasons my research was considered good is that I was very grounded. I could just put together things. And so as far as progressives, there were things, that so clearly my first book won national prizes and it's been cited by the Supreme Court. And I was a Democrat when I wrote it. And at that time, people attacked me. Some of them, especially in the Black community, they said that I was a conservative and that I had sold out Black people because of the book argued political party was more important than the race of the representative, and that as long as Blacks held the views they did, they'd best be represented by Democrats. Consequently, it didn't make sense to create majority Black districts. That was controversial back then. And so at that time, I was being attacked, and I had nothing to fall back on because I had superficial relationships with my colleagues, but I was not in a church. I was not a religious person, and I was being called all sorts of names. I was being called a sellout and a conservative. And back then, that was like being called a name, a bad name. I had no support network for that. And so in that sense, I was conservative. But as I grew in my Christian faith, the biblical values and principles that I were learning did not line up with the platform of the Democratic Party. So my first reaction was my decision was to become an independent. But I called myself an independent, but I was not voting for Democrats. I was voting for Republicans. And it took a while for me to work my way to the point that I became a Republican, and I wear the label of Black conservative as a badge of honor. But if you were to ask me about my group identity, my first identity is with Christ.
Come on.
And then my second identity would be conservatism, and then race would probably be, third if I must choose. But my primary identity is in Christ. And I believe that a lot of the race problems we have in America, we would not have those problems if we, as Christian believers, understood, the new life and the identity in Christ. It's not in our skin color, our race, our occupation, our gender orientation, those things.
Yeah, and speaking of the race problems, and the fact that you said you have this ability to see things and kind of ahead of time, many people have recognized in the past even few weeks that BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, is really in essence a Marxist movement. But I think you were one of the first ones to see that way back in 2016, even kind of got in some hot water for it. Can you tell, how did you see that back then? What was going on?
What's interesting, I think, is that during I left Vanderbilt University in 2017. I took early retirement, but probably 5 or 6 years before I left, I started realizing the importance of critical race theory and communism and how it was impacting our society. So I started teaching a course that looked at the impact of communist thought on American political society. So I was already attuned, to Marxist rhetoric and critical theory. With Black Lives Matter, I believe I was the first person, certainly on national TV, that called it what it was.
Mm.
And in the course of preparing for a CNN interview where I was going to debate a woman named Areva Martin, I just went to their website to do some research. And when I looked at their website, I felt like I was just reading planks from the communist agenda because it had very little to do with blacks. And it was pushing, of course, the LGBT agenda. Two of the three women who founded the organization are queer. And they now tell us that they're trained Marxists. And when they say trained Marxists, you really have to hang out there with that statement. What is a trained Marxist? Like, it's not someone just read a book about Marxism. I mean, anyone can read books about Marxism, and lots of people read Karl Marx's works, but they're not trained Marxists. Trained Marxists would be someone that's actually gone and studied and practiced how to take those concepts and use it to change the society or overthrow a government. They've gone to some type of training camp. They are trained Marxists. They're not just people that were casual readers. But for me, uh, in 2016, after the Dallas police officers were slain on national TV, I said that they were Black Lives Matter, that they were a destructive force in our society, and that they were Marxists. And that led to, my university got very upset and sent out a statement, and so did the blacks on campus. And up until that point, I had only offended the Muslims and the LGBT community. And when I said that on CNN, I unified the campus.
Wow. Wow.
Wow, that's crazy, man. And that just is where we are. I think when you stand and take a stand for truth these days, you're just going to pay the price. And I know elsewhere you have actually said that BLM actually uses black people.
Oh, yes.
It plays on their pain.
I believe progressives hate blacks, and I know hate is a strong expression. But when I look at what progressivism has done to the black community, I don't see anything but hate. Just look at how the abortion agenda has been pushed on blacks, and that it's okay with progressives if we have cities and towns where there are more black babies being aborted than are being born, and how they will take certain black people and they will put them in charge. Like the current president of Planned Parenthood is a highly educated black woman who has been a social justice warrior. She's pushing their agenda, and that goes back to Margaret Sanger, that she talked openly about co-opting black pastors, and she even gave Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, an award. And so they have always used blacks. And this whole thing about defunding the police, all right, you defund the police and remove them from the inner cities, who's going to die? Black people, because they're more likely to be victims as well as perpetrators, and the quality of their lives diminish. When you shut down public schools using COVID as an excuse, who's going to suffer? It's going to be the inner city people. They're the ones that are getting a poor education anyway. The left has not been able to educate them, and so now they shut down their schools. When you tell people that COVID is more likely to kill your population, that you're vulnerable, the disease is racist, it's going after people of color, but it's okay for you to go out and protest and be in mass groups. That's okay. If you really believe that more people are dying and that you're supposed to social distance, well, why would you tell black folk to go out in mass protests?
Mm.
When you have the white leaders of Black Lives Matter out there encouraging the attacks on police, and the political left pushing a narrative that causes young Black people to hate police and want to kill the police. I mean, how would you do that if you didn't hate Black people? Because you know that if they continue doing what they're doing now, we are going to have a race war where Black people would lose. And people like me uh, and uh, and other people that are on the we out there, we're on the sidelines, we're preaching peace and unity. We may lose our lives in the battle, because if it's a battle between Black and white, the people that are killing are not going to say, "Oh, well, you're okay," but you're not.
Whew. Wow. And so, did you have something?
Yeah, it's just really difficult hearing all that you just said so eloquently about the political left or progressivism, just really their tactics,
But
because
they
they
use
really,
deception. They
they
use
do.
deception, infiltration, and manipulation. And
Mm.
you see all that in Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals.
Mm-hmm.
And so Black people are being manipulated, but so are whites, and in particularly the church. The church is allowing the secular humanists that are Marxists to give them advice on race relations. When they have the Bible, they should be leading the way. They're not leading the way, they are following, and they are following those that call themselves diversity, equity, inclusion trainers and spokespersons and pastors that are steeped in liberation theology, which is all Marxism. And as a consequence, our country is going down.
Mm. Could you speak to the church, like specifically the white church? What would you tell them to do in this moment, this cultural moment we're in, with regard to that issue?
They need to dust off the Bibles and go back to all the scriptures on race, and it's all there. And when it comes to Black people in their congregation that may have grievances and they want to blame white people for slavery and things that happened, generations ago, then they need to remind them what Jesus said about forgiveness. And I think that everything that we need to be racially reconciled with one another, it's all in the Bible. And we know that from one man, God made all nations of men and women. We know that God is no respecter of persons. We know that God has said, by our love, that's how the world will know us. If we actually practice the love of Christ, it transcends race and ethnicity and all of those other things that divide us. And so the church has given up its authority by following the world.
Mm. That's good.
Amen.
That's good. We're going to blast that out, because I think you're so right. We've got to, Dr. Vodi Bakum says, especially with this movement that's going on, we have to expose and oppose it, get back to the scripture. And you even called, which I think is true, and I love it. You've said in many cases, white folks in the church are being cowardly, and it's time to rise up and take some courage and stop letting fear and this white guilt that Shelby Steele talks about drive us to do things that are untrue and unbiblical. You wrote a book, I think, in the early 2000s called The New White Nationalism. Can you tell us what is the major message of that book? What did you learn? What did you hope to convey through that book?
That was a book written by a new Christian.
Okay.
That was my first piece of scholarship after I had my Christian conversion experience, where I really knew what it meant to be a Christian. And I had been working on a different book on affirmative action, When Whites and Blacks Agree. And around that time, there were some high-profile hate crimes that took place where people just went out and killed or maimed people of a different race just out of racial hatred. And I became fascinated with the fact, I became fascinated with the question of why would someone hate another person of a different race to the point they'd want to kill them? And then I thought the only way to get the answers would be to interview these people. And then I looked at my hands and I said, well, I can't interview these people. I have to find someone else who can interview these people. And so at that time, when I first started my study, I hadn't left Princeton, but so it's late 1990s, late yeah, I guess late 1990s. Um, I hired a Princeton preceptor who has a PhD, elderly white man. He's middle aged then, and he was my research assistant. And I identified 10 white leaders from least extreme to most extreme. And so, least extreme, I would say, would be the Jared Taylor of the New Century Foundation, American Renaissance, Yale educated, London School of Economics graduate, least extreme. And then William Pierce, who wrote the Turner Diaries, would have been most extreme. He started a hate group called the National Alliance. I picked 10 people that were interviewed at least once, and in some cases, there may have been a couple of conversations with those individuals, but I also drew on survey data and other people's research to do that study. And what I saw was that there were some issues that that created grievances that I felt that if we did not address them adequately, that we were going to have unprecedented levels of racial turmoil and racial conflict. And so that book, The New White Nationalism in America's Challenged Integration, was meant to be a wake-up call. I felt like if we were ever going to have racial reconciliation, for one thing, we have to listen to everyone, and that there are some legitimate grievances that I believe white people have, and that these are policy areas where they felt that they were being discriminated against, and that not enough was being done when it came to crime, protecting them from black crime, and the immigration issue. And these were not just white issues, these were American issues where the politicians had neglected their leadership responsibilities to address these issues, and they were affecting the quality of life for many Americans. I saw that there was an opening for people who were very extreme to take those issues and to politicize them in such a way that we would end up in the situation where we are today. And probably the most important thing that I saw in the book was that identity politics and multiculturalism that came from the political left provided a great justification for white people to organize the way other groups had organized, because you can't say that blacks and Hispanics and Asians have an identity and they have a culture that should be celebrated, but no, not you white people. There's something wrong with that. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Equal Protection Clause, I mean, clearly the Constitution protects whites as well as other minorities, but there were lots of grievances with white people feeling discriminated against. And the agenda of the political left, I felt that if you took it to its logical conclusion, you would end up with white consciousness, white interests, and the same kind of identity politics that you see being played out today, because the left has provided the justification for every group to organize and defend their own rights and to protect themselves. And in this moment where you have Black Lives Matter and racist attacks on white people, like the little 5-year-old boy that was pulled off his bike and shot and executed by a neighbor. You have a white man that was working in a store and a black man that had watched videos of police abusing people, decided he was going to kill someone white. And so he went out and he killed this innocent person. The woman who said that all lives matter, the young mother who was killed because she said that. And I mean, that's just three cases. There have been numerous cases of white people being targeted in hate crimes, but we don't call those hate crimes. And as a consequence, there are a lot of grievances out there that need to be addressed. In that book, The New White Nationalism, I argued that we needed to move away from racial identity politics, from identity politics, period, towards the American national identity. And I felt that the nationalism that we as Americans would have and should have is based on principles and values and a shared history, and that was the only thing that could hold our nation together. And so in my concluding chapter, part of it talks about what the nation needs to do as a whole, but the other part talks about what I felt like what black people needed to do through their leaders. When I looked at the issue, I felt like this is not just a white issue, that black people also have a responsibility, and that if we're going to have racial integration and racial reconciliation, then each side has to take responsibility.
Wow, that's an incredible breakdown, and I hear it's like a 500 and something page book, so we'll have to
Well,
get
I
that and
thought
work
that
through
was
it.
going to be my last academic book because when I got saved, I thought the Lord was calling me into the ministry, and that as soon as I finished that book, I misheard Him. As soon as I finished the book, that He was going to pull me out of academia. I was going to become the next Joyce Myers, and I was going to be traveling around the world, and I was going to be speaking to these huge crowds, and I had it all worked out in my imagination. It didn't work out that way.
Man, that's a whole nother interview right there. Well, the way it's been positioned these days, I wanted to kind of wrap it up toward this topic, but I know you're actually part of the group that I believe it's called the National Advisory Board of Black Voices for Trump, which is interesting, especially in light of that book, because he's been cashed out as
Right.
as kind of the canonical face of white nationalism. And the way you just described it, to me, he sounds like the opposite, because he's trying to identify people as Americans, but they keep doing the identity politics thing to him.
There are a couple of things I think we should talk about as we wrap up. Is I'm
Yeah.
also part of 1776 Unite, that was started by Bob Woodson in reaction to the New York Times 1619 Project.
Okay.
And the 1619 Project, which has put curriculum in over 3,500 schools across America, is based on a false narrative about America's founding and says the country is, is guilty of systemic racism, and it's very divisive, and it's very Marxist, based on critical race theory. And with the 1776 Unite, we are very focused on telling the true history of America as a country that was not perfect, but it's one where whites and blacks have always worked together. There were always the abolitionists, and there were many whites that gave their lives to end slavery and to bring about better conditions for blacks. And you think about the period of blacks when they were freed from slavery, the Rosenwald schools that were established across the South. All the historically black colleges were set up by white people, and the sacrifices and the generosity and the philanthropy of white people, that's not something that the people cite when they talk about America being systemically racist. America was never great. America was a great country that got rid of slavery. And not only did it get rid of slavery, it has always made adjustments and tried to be a good country. We've made mistakes, but we've always improved ourselves. And when it comes to this present moment and people who say, well, Donald Trump is a racist and all white people are racist, well, critical race theory says that racism is permanent, that whiteness is property, so that every white person has this valuable property. And the only way they can make themselves right is they have to divest themselves of this valuable property in whiteness, and they have to become anti-racist. And having a mixed marriage that doesn't make you anti-racist. To be anti-racist, you got to go out and I guess join Antifa or Black Lives Matter and take your marching orders from them, and then you're anti-racist. Except you are, as long as you're white, you can never be good enough. And that is totally contrary to the scripture.
Yes.
We know that Jesus Christ died on the cross for our past, present, and future sins. We're not responsible for the sins of our ancestors. And racism is a sin, and it's a sin that whites and blacks can be guilty of. And so it's just critical theory nonsense to argue that only white people can be racist, that people of color can't be racist. That's nonsense.
Yeah, and you made me think, one of the other tenets of critical race theory is that racism doesn't go away, but it changes forms. And I think, if you were to make that case, I think the best chance you'd probably have actually is with the Democratic Party being the party of slavery, the party of Jim Crow, and now, as you say, they've wedded themselves with progressivism and BLM, which tends to be racist in itself. It's like it's
Well, here's
changed
what they've
forms.
done. They created the KKK, and they created Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And the KKK was their terrorist arm against blacks. And right now they're using Antifa and Black Lives Matter to terrorize whites and anyone else that gets in their way. So the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Hey. Yes, and just what would you say then to, young black millennials that they watch CNN or they catch the splashings off of the fake news, and so they just assume, man, Trump's racist and people that vote for him are racist, and we got to do everything we can to oppose him and this white nationalism. What would you say to them in this moment?
Well, first of all, they need to look around because there are lots of black people now that are woke to what the Democratic Party has been doing, and they're supporting Trump or they're supporting conservatism. And so they're not on board with everything that they see or hear on CNN if they watch CNN. And I can tell you that if you have 4 TV screens in front of you and you have MSNBC, you have CNN, you have Fox, and ABC, you're just going to be startled by the different messages that each audience gets a different message. And if you're not, flipping through the channels and getting your information from more than one source, you're going to have a very narrow view of reality. And I think that I would tell young black people to look at the conditions in their community and look at those cities and towns that have been represented by black leaders for generations. They have voted for the Democratic Party for generations. Donald Trump, in one term where he had his hands tied by the people that were trying to thwart his every move, has done more for blacks than I would say all the previous presidents in my memory. They need to do their research, and they don't need to just parrot what they hear. They need to actually do some research. And if they do research, I think that they will at least be able to see that Donald Trump is not their enemy. The Republican Party is not their enemy. It's not perfect, but it's not their enemy. And the only way that they're going to get responsiveness from the political system is to be able to hold the political parties accountable. You cannot do that if you just blindly support one.
Will you run for office again?
I don't think so. I mean, I never felt there was a call on my life. I ran because someone needed to run. And and the fact that I didn't win means that God had something else for me, which I believe is what I'm doing now. I would not be able to do the media or write the things that I write if I were mayor of Nashville.
Yeah,
so good.
That's true. Well, had we still been in Nashville, we lived in Nashville for a number of years, you would have been our vote for sure. But I think you're right. You're making such a difference. And I want to encourage our listeners, too, that you were in a movie recently called Uncle Tom, put on by Larry Elder. Really good movie. What else do you recommend? How do they stay connected with what you're doing? And what's the best way for our listeners to stay connected?
Well, I have websites, and I'm not sure when this is going to air, but I have a personal website, carolmswain.com, but my blog posts and podcasts are on bethepeoplenews.com. Instead of We the People, it's bethepeoplenews.com. And I have a 501c3 nonprofit called Be the People Project. And one of the events that we're planning, we have 2. One is a local Franklin, Tennessee showing of the Uncle Tom film with the cast, some of the cast there. And on October 17th, there will be a national tribute to law enforcement, a conference that I put together. Bob Woodson is the keynote speaker. And the first 100 plus law enforcement officers, active duty, will get a $50 gift certificate if they sign up and attend that conference on October 17th, which is a Saturday, from 10 a.m. to noon. And so I would encourage people to sign up and participate in this tribute to our law enforcement officers across the country.
Wow.
Beautiful.
And that showing for Uncle Tom, is that going to be the Franklin Theater, the old
Yes,
theater there?
on Friday, September 25th. It's coming up fast. And then the national tribute to law enforcement, October 17th, is a Saturday, and that's a little ways off.
So fun. We've done
Good stuff.
many a concert in the
Yeah.
Franklin Theater, so
Yeah.
that would be fun for us to get to go and see that. So that's awesome. Well, thank you so much. But
All
this has
right.
been a treat. We've learned and been inspired today. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you.